This is called The Objectification and Sexualization of Women, with an emphasis on pornography. Now, first, we need to talk about what is allowed and what is not allowed on the airwaves and how pornography fits into that. So we're first going to discuss this concept of obscenity. Obscenity is never allowed on the airwaves. It is not protected under the First Amendment, and it should not be confused with vulgarity, profanity, or explicit content, although there's a very thin line. Now, vulgarity, profanity, and explicit content are all allowed in some capacity as long as there is warnings and labels, but obscenity is never allowed. Now, in order for us to decide if something's obscenity or not obscenity, right? If something is obscene or not, we use what is called the Miller test. The Miller test was developed in California in 1973, and there are different tests that we apply to the content to decide if it's obscene. The first is an average person applying contemporary community standards must find that the material as a whole appeals to the prurient interest. Now, there is a lot of words here that are very vague and left up for interpretation. Like, for instance, what is an average person? And then what is contemporary community standards? Is contemporary something within the last year, the last decade? And then, of course, what is the prurient interest and who gets to decide that? The material must also depict or describe in a patently offensive way sexual conduct specifically defined by applicable law. Again, a lot of gray area here. What is patently offensive even mean? And then what is applicable law, and who gets to decide which law is applicable to the content and which is not? The last part is the material taken as a whole must lack serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. And of course, specifically when we talk about art is very subjective. So again, who gets to make that decision? A lot of times it falls into the hands of the different justices that are presiding over the case, whether that be at local, state, or federal, or even the Supreme Court, to really decide what that content is. So again, it's very subjective, very up for interpretation. So the obscenity test is really something that is put into the hands of justices and lawmakers and really kind of flows and fluctuates between different communities and different areas. We also have to talk about different types of definitions. There's pornography and there's erotic media. Now, these definitions vary according to the quantity and the quantity of sex and the quantity of violence. Now, there's a lot of different definitions for pornography and erotic media, but academics tend to operate within the same field within their discipline. So, pornography can be described as any explicit sexual depiction. Scholars usually refer to it as explicit sexual behavior and nudity in a context that is frequently characterized by depictions of one character exerting physical or psychological dominance over another. So violence falls into this category. Erotic media usually refers to material that is sexually explicit as well, but is happening in the absence of violence and without the overt power dynamics that appear in pornography. Now, this is, of course, another gray area, another gray line, because we can take shows like Empire, like Scandal, and there are sex scenes, and some of it may include rape and violence, but you don't see any sexual organs, you don't see ejaculation, and we don't see the actual penetration happening. So again, these definitions are kind of up in the air. But for the purpose of the class, we're going to talk about pornography and erotic media in terms of sexual violence, in terms of ejaculation, in terms of penetration, and power dynamics. So again, if we're thinking about pornography, we're seeing visual ejaculation, we're seeing sex organs, and we're seeing penetration and usually violence. Erotic media, the absence of that. It's usually more about the affect, the feelings, the sensual nature of sex. Now, there's been different types of studies published about the repercussions of sexual content, even pornography, and there are two main kind of findings that have come to fruition. One is the trigger hypothesis, and the other is the safety valve theory. The trigger hypothesis basically states that sexual content is going to trigger a response of some sort in individuals, and it's actually going to provoke them in a way that might lead them to commit an actual sex act or a sex crime like rape or indecent exposure. Safety valve theory is the opposite of that, where it is viewed that human beings are sexual by nature, we're innately sexual, and that we always want to have sex, and that actual viewing of sexual content is going to purge that sensation. It's a cathartic type of feeling, and it's actually going to satisfy our sexual urges and prevent us from committing a sex crime. There have been previous studies all the way since the 1970s that looked at this, and the preponderance of studies has really leaned more towards the trigger hypothesis. This, of course, does not happen across the board. We have to also take into consideration the age of the audience and also any predispositions that the audience members might have. So maybe they're already predispositioned to violence genetically, or maybe they grew up in a violent household, or they were sexually abused, or different types of predispositions that come into play with that. So, of course, media does not have 100% of power over individuals, but it does influence sexual behavior in some capacity. It could either be triggering or it could be cathartic in nature. There's also some different ways in which we think about pornographic sexual depictions, and usually it's how it raises the elevations of arousal. Now, there's two different types of arousal: physiological arousal and sexual arousal. Physiological arousal has to do with the heart rate, blood pressure, perspiration. Also, sexual arousal has to do with the same things, but it's more specific to the sex organs. So we're trying to measure different types of responses to sexual content. Usually we ask people, we do interviews, and we give them surveys, self-report. We also have different types of instruments that are physiological in nature that go in the vagina or around the penis, and they can tell if the area is engorged with blood, if there's an erection, if there's some kind of enlargement of the vulva or other types of sex organs, if there is moisture and heat, those types of things, because sometimes we as individuals cannot really tell if we're aroused, or maybe we might be too embarrassed, or we don't want to talk about being aroused. So physiological instruments actually take the body itself and looks at arousal by physiologically measuring the reactions that the body has to different types of sexual content. Of course, we also see that these types of depictions and sexual content can lead to rape myth acceptance and sexual expectations, which means that individuals, especially those that are young and have not yet had sex, will tend to think that what is happening in sexual erotica or pornography is actual commonplace, and then when they have physical sex in person to person and face to face, it may not be that way. Also, this rape myth acceptance that women just need to be asked over and over, or maybe coerced, that women want to be forced into having sex, and that no doesn't really mean no. No sometimes can mean yes. That is rape myth and not really true. Also, it can affect sexual performance and intimacy issues, right? By watching pornography, we might become addicted to porn or reliant on visual stimulation in order to actually get erections or perform any type of sexual activities. And then, of course, body comparisons. Everybody who appears in pornography, for the most part, is going to be very chiseled, very thin, very lean, voluptuous breast, huge penises, and of course we start to compare our own bodies to that of the actors and actresses that we see in pornography, and that can also lead to some issues in terms of weight and eating disorders as well. Pornography can become a really problem in terms of addiction. Now, pornography, when it is consumed in what medical doctors might say is healthy doses, right, in moderation, it can be quite healthy, and we'll get to that in just a second. But when it becomes something that is overwhelming, something that takes away from your time and attention of other things, then it becomes an addiction. And there's some research to back this up. 46% of men and 16% of women between the ages of 18 and 39 intentionally view pornography in a given week. Among the elderly, while sexual intercourse decreases, masturbation and the use of pornography actually increases. In fact, there's been a lot of studies that at retirement homes, the rise of STDs and STIs is at an increasing alarming rate, more than among younger people. This could probably be because most of these people were in committed monogamous relationships, maybe have not gotten sexual education, and so they may not know about the protection STIs. 16% or 66% of porn users view it for 5 hours or less a month. 16% of porn users view it for less than 15 hours a month. 6% use it for more than 26 hours a month, and 3% use it for more than 50 hours per month. 9% of viewers are unable to refrain from viewing pornography. So there is this addiction to pornography, but it is in a very small amount of people. But this is still alarming because it can have these different types of psychological and physiological ramifications for these individuals. There was one study that was done in 2014 by Cambridge University that actually studied the brains of compulsive porn users and how that their brain actually reacted in the very same way that drug addicts reacted to drug cues. Compulsive porn users actually craved porn and did not have a higher sexual desire than other controls. It aligned with current models of addiction and other types of addictions, not just in terms of pornography, but drugs and other things like that, alcohol. That higher sexual desire causes compulsive porn use. 50% of subjects, the average age was 25 for these individuals, had difficulty achieving erections with real partners, yet they could achieve erections with pornography. Younger subjects had enhanced reward circuit activity when exposed to porn cues and higher dopamine spikes and greater reward sensitivity for teenagers, which is the exact same thing that happens when drug addicts are actually given drug cues as well too. The dopamine spikes as well in them. So there is a correlation between the addiction to pornography and the addiction to drugs. Now, of course, there are some positive effects for pornography use. This can be in terms of psychological effects and actual mental health. There can be, actually, this is the opposite. Sorry, I got confused here. We're still in the bad part, the ramifications, the dangerous consequences of addiction. There's reduced cognitive functions. More than half of men who use porn have acknowledged their porn use has caused them problems in life, with the majority actually experiencing psychological and behavioral repercussions. People often, specifically men, experience depression because they can't actually perform physically in the face-to-face physical world, and also anxiety. There's a lot of personal factors that have to deal with this as well too, like loneliness, anxiety, depression, and also different types of interpersonal stress. And then, of course, impulsive and risky behaviors. This extends to not just those that are addicted to pornography, but all internet pornography users, and not just problematic use of pornography, right? Is that some people might go out and actually be persuaded to have more sex with more partners and not actually take the safe precautions to prevent STIs and different types of other diseases that they could probably get. Now we are going to talk about the benefits. This is the benefit slide. There is this insecure or guilt about sexuality and sexual desires. Usually it has to do in very conservative households. That could do with political ideologies or religion. And so those individuals are actually able to use pornography as a way to gain familiarity and comfort with different types of sexual practices. Monogamous couples can seek greater sexual satisfaction in their relationships. People living in remote areas that are far away from bars or other types of social networking spaces can actually use pornography to form meaningful social networks. And people who seek to satisfy fantasies that their partners and spouses or people in general just don't want to engage in can use pornography as a way to mitigate this different types of fantasy seeking, but also as a way to mitigate potential frustration for these individuals who are in committed relationships from actually cheating physically with their partners and actually going to pornography to satisfy those fantasies. Now, of course, that enters this question also of what is cheating. Is pornography cheating, or is actual interaction, physically engagement with a person cheating? That is a physiological question or a psychological question that we won't get to right now. It also provides a way to cope with difficulties that might be facing, such as stress, depression, and loneliness. Now, as long as individuals aren't relying on pornography to satisfy these things, and it's just something that they use occasionally, then this is looked at as a benefit by some academics. Now I want to go over really quick the Pornhub statistics. Now Pornhub is a porn site on the internet, and every single year they release this year in review. And so for 2018, I got a couple of the charts that they released that I think is going to be interesting for us. So for Pornhub, right, this is just the one site that hosts both heterosexual and same-sex couples, right, on their website. This is some of the statistics. Over 207,000 videos are viewed every minute on Pornhub. Over 10,000 hours of videos are watched per minute. Over 12 videos are uploaded, and 2 hours of content are uploaded every minute. And then, of course, you can go around this graphic here and see all the other things. One thing that I thought was interesting is that every single minute there are 55 views of Kim Kardashian's sex tape. So even though some people may not think that Kim Kardashian is not relevant, Her ass obviously is. Also, interestingly, in 2018, Pornhub takes a tally of all the different searches that happen throughout the year, and then they kind of rank them on the searches that really defined 2018. So these are searches that had to do with pornography, but also were tied to actual events that were happening in the real world. And of course, Stormy Daniels, the porn star that has accused Trump of lots of different things, was the #1 search that defined 2018. Fortnite, huge video game, and one of the biggest searches was actual videos that showed characters from Fortnite or people dressing up like the characters having sex. 4K, romantic, trans, outdoors, tattoos, Tinder, bow set, and threesome all rounded out the searches that defined 2018. Yes, you heard right. Fortnite sex. The most searched terms for 2018, the top one is lesbian. So again, we have all these things happening against the LGBTQ community, but lesbians are seen as performing for the sexual satisfaction of men. And then of course we go down here, MILF, stepmom, mom, teen, Asian, massage, Korean, ebony, anal, Fortnite again, Chinese, anime, trans, public, and JOI, which is jack off instruction, are all the most searched terms for 2018. So as you can see from this list, we still have this objectification of ethnic and racial minorities, specifically Asian women. And then of course down here at the very bottom, jack off instruction, it kind of lends the suggestion that people are still going to the internet to learn how to masturbate, which means that we are in a very, or these people might be in very conservative spaces or families where they're told that masturbation maybe is unhealthy or something that is abomination, and they're going to pornography to learn how to masturbate and better pleasure themselves. This right here is a graph that is the top 20 countries by traffic, and as you can see, the Western countries are the most highly consumers of pornography, with the United States leading and the United Kingdom coming in second. And then we have a couple of non-Western countries mixed in here too: India, Japan, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Australia, Philippines, Mexico, and Brazil, rounding out the top 10. When we look at the United States specifically, we see that in the United States, the top searches of 2018, again, kind of mirror the searches we saw earlier: MILF, ebony, threesome, stepmom, Latina, big ass, big tits, anal, black, and Fortnite, all coming up in those searches. The trending searches: Fortnite, trans, big tits, ebony, MILF. Top 5 porn stars are also on here, top 5 categories, and top 5 relative categories. So as you can see, lots of searches happening here, but also lots of objectification and sexualization of racial and ethnic minorities, and also sexual minorities like trans individuals are on here too as well, and lesbians, scissoring. Time spent per visit in the United States: states that lasted the longest and states that lasted the shortest. Pun actually intended. So Mississippi, South Carolina, Arkansas, Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, Missouri, Georgia, all rounding out the top of the states that spent the most time on Pornhub. Again, these are all states that are located in the South, states that interestingly have just passed all of these anti-abortion laws as well, and are very anti-LGBTQ. So we see these states actually turning to pornography and still having these very conservative laws. So it's very interesting, the dichotomy there that's happening. The age of Pornhub visitors, the average age for the whole year was 35.5 years old. If you look at this chart up here in the top right, this pie graph, we see that majority of the individuals are between the ages of 25 and 34. And then the second largest category of Pornhub visitors by age is between the ages of 18 and 24, which also posts the question that individuals who may have not yet had sex in person are they going to pornography to learn how to have sex? And by doing that, are they then being kind of jaded by what sex really is like? Because pornography sex isn't often like sex that happens in the real life. And then of course down here at the very bottom, the average age per country. So 38 is the average age in the United States, 38 in the United Kingdom, but in India it's 29. And then we have traffic by phone, desk, and tablet. Here we can see that a majority of users on Pornhub are consuming pornography on their actual phone. They're 71.6% of individuals that view pornography on these 3 different devices are actually watching on their telephone, their mobile device. Game consoles are also being used to access pornography. Here we can see that PlayStation is being used by the majority of game users to access pornography, over half, 54.4%. Xbox coming in second as well. So that's begging us to ask the question, how are women being sexually objectified and sexualized, not just in the media in general, but specifically on pornography?